Informed Sources is made possible in part by Susie and Pierre G. Villeray.
With a continued passion for public television, we are proud to underwrite Informed Sources.
Please join us in supporting WYES Television.
This program is brought to you in part by the Eugenie and Joseph Jones Family Foundation, a local foundation proud to support education, the arts, and culture in the greater New Orleans area.
Hello, I'm Marcia Kavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. There are two especially popular seasons in the New Orleans area, Carnival and Saint Season. The latter starts in earnest this weekend with high hopes that just could be realized. We'll be looking at what to expect as well as the projected success at Tulane and LSU. Another competition already took place this week as candidates for governor met in the first televised debate. After further review, we will examine if there were any fumbles. On the other side of the news, a grueling hearing questioned if the New Orleans Police Department's evaluation of a former mayoral bodyguard was adequate, and a former priest who has been watched closely by the media was indicted on sex charges. We'll look at these stories as well as a new book by one of our panelists that tells about the days when boxing was an escape for local boys who were poor but tough, and one who became a multiple champion. In the ring for us are tonight's Informed Sources, Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources, Missy Wilkinson, staff writer of the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate, Ramon Vargas, weekend editor of The Guardian U.S., and Jeff Duncan, sports columnist, the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate. Also, he's an analyst for Fox 8 Sports. We'll go over to Ramon first because there was an indictment yesterday of a retired priest, one who you have covered in all the stories that you have done about the priest sex scandals, and so the indictment now has been handed down.
Yeah, 91-year-old Lawrence Hecker has been charged formally now by a grand jury with aggravated rape, aggravated kidnapping, aggravated crime against nature, which is basically statutory rape from the time when the crime occurred, which was in 1975, and theft, which is a little bit of a novel approach in that, from what my reporting indicates, is that it appears that there will be an effort to argue that the administrative actions taken by the church and by Hecker himself to kind of conceal some of his misdeeds robbed this victim in particular the opportunity to file a lawsuit at a time when it wouldn't have been vulnerable to a statute of limitations argument, right? That it was filed too late, basically. And so we'll see. That'll have big implications if that is ever tried in a court of law, obviously. And so that, in sum, is what happened. And these charges, obviously he fell under a lot of attention after we published a story in June that kind of outlined how he had admitted in a typed statement to molesting or harassing multiple teenage children that he met through work in the Archdiocese of New Orleans and various archdiocesan institutions, and nothing was really done. I mean, he went back to work. He kind of quietly retired in 2002 when the Boston Archdiocese clerical molestation scandal kind of erupted and made headlines across the world. And then another 16 years after that passed before he was included on a list of credibly accused child molesters that served in the New Orleans clergy over the years. And that was kind of the first time that he was outed.
But that statement that you all uncovered and published in The Guardian first in June, that was taken when? That was made when?
That was in 1999.
Okay, so this was known by the church higher-ups.
Sure, and the thing is that statement mentions how there was an encounter in 1988 with the Archbishop at the time, it was the late Philip Hannon, who kind of told him, like, hey, like, just make sure that doesn't happen again. And then there was also that statement talked about, there were also documents that talked about how a policeman in the 1970s told him, like, hey, try to not go swimming nude with boys at the local health club and just try to not be so close to them. And so there was certainly, his conduct, I think, was a pretty well-known thing. Dating back several decades.
But how far back?
I mean, you're talking about the 1970s at least, right?
Yeah.
So you're talking about almost a half century at this point.
And so the indictment was filed in Orleans Parish, and Jason Williams, Orleans Parish DA, made the announcement yesterday about this.
Yes, he obtained the charges. Certainly, I think after, there have been. I know that this information's kind of been in federal court in the context of the bankruptcy. There was a federal court lawsuit, so certainly there was also state court lawsuits, and some of the misconduct is in some of the outlying parishes. It was Jason Williams who filed must be said, was the first one to file charges against this particular clergyman. First time, he's 91, turns 92 in 6 days. And so obviously that is a factor in terms of, I think that a lot of people are preparing for the possibility that he doesn't live to see the outcome of a trial. But that said, yesterday, speaking to the victim through his attorney, it was a big moment of validation that something was done, especially because when the crime happened in 1975, he reported it to his school. And nothing was done until yesterday when a grand jury returned an indictment.
How many victims?
Lawrence Hecker, I mean, we know that he had, there were 7 that were mentioned in the note that I mentioned in 1999 that he had acknowledged either molesting or harassing. Then there were another settlement. So you're talking upwards of 10, between 10 and 15. It's difficult to know because like the records are incomplete that we have, but certainly they paid more than $300,000 worth of settlements involving several victims in the 10 years before they filed for the Archdiocese filed for bankruptcy in 2020.
And this is also the priest who, about a week and a half or so, 2 weeks ago, spoke to David Hammer, and we had David on the show a couple of weeks ago talking about this, actually saying, admitted. Go ahead.
Yeah, I spoke to David Hammer and spoke to me as well. I was standing right by
really?
David and asked him.
You guys have worked on these stories together for years.
I asked, and then I asked him specifically about this one charge, and it was interesting because he was confronted with this typed statement and acknowledged, and I think that's what you're referring to when he acknowledged that he was telling the truth when he wrote that statement. Asked him specifically about the charge, which I was expecting that he would be indicted on eventually, and I knew that that was a rare opportunity to have. I asked him about the allegation, which is, did you choke a boy until he was unconscious and then rape him after he was, while he was still unconscious? And he said no. It was interesting to kind of see him be able to kind of distinguish between like what he was kind of locked into saying and then this other allegation that wasn't quite documented before.
And Jason Williams has said that he wants to try to move this along as quickly as possible.
It's an acknowledgement of his advanced age, Lawrence Hecker's advanced age.
Yeah.
Ramon, from covering this, have you seen anything happen to change, like in the apparatus of the church, either to prevent this kind of thing or to get the knowledge known quicker? And also in the legal system, has anything changed?
Let me just make this comment. I know that Lawrence Hecker was put through a background check as recent in the last few years. And it came back because he had not been charged, much less, convicted of anything. If you run his name through a background check, it's a clean background check, right? There's no red flag raised, and I think that that's the issue with. Certainly, I think that there are background checks, which speaks to a change in prior years. But if there isn't proper reporting, then there's nothing to flag for those background checks. That's what I'll say.
And also one quick note that Jason Williams during the press conference yesterday basically said, anyone's conspiring to cover up hurting children and hiding behind a veil of an institution, you will be found out and prosecuted within the full extent of the law. So he's not stopping.
No, I think that there is obviously that pattern. You can spread it out across several of the clergymen that are on that list, and I think that they're going to look at it closely, and we'll see what comes from that.
All right, Ramon, thanks a lot. Missy, over to you. You sat through a 3-day hearing there in federal court, NOPD, regarding the NOPD federal consent decree, and also the investigation into Officer Vappy. Tell us what happened there.
Yeah, so 3 long days. I was not there for like 100% of it because I had other stories, but the gist of it is NOPD got the chance to defend their investigation for federal judge Susie Morgan, who has overseen the consent decree. They're basically saying we did a good, solid investigation of our Officer Vappy, who is allegedly scamming the payroll system while he's with the mayor in her apartment. So this was their day in court to say we did a thorough job with this. I'm not so sure that Susie Morgan is convinced. It all hinges really on one paragraph in the consent decree, and that is 454, which says that anytime there is a serious misconduct allegation, NOPD's Public Integrity Bureau, which is their internal investigation arm, must furnish their report to federal monitors before closing the investigation and administering the discipline. And they admit they didn't do that. And their whole thing is, we didn't find any evidence that this was a serious allegation.
And
but
the
it
allegation
is theft, technically.
is payroll fraud.
Yeah,
Basically, that's what
allegations-
it's all revolving around, is the hours that Vappy logged, and he was present with the mayor for a long time. And the NOPD is basically saying that they didn't think this was really serious?
They, yes, they pretty much are saying that they did not find evidence to support payroll fraud, although there were 3 separate allegations brought. One was by Professor Skip Gallagher, who is a whistleblower who has investigated payroll fraud before. Another was from Lee Zurich, investigative reporter. And another was a Hano fraud complaint that he was billing for the NOPD while doing his role as volunteer role at Hano. So investigators on the stands admitted that they didn't interview the people who brought these complaints. They didn't interview Zurich. They did not interview Gallagher. So it's hard to see how their investigation was thorough without speaking to these key players, including the mayor herself, Vappy's wife. I'm not sure that the judge will be convinced that it was really actually that deep of an investigation.
Okay, another issue that came out too was that the former superintendent actually reassigned Vappy because he had been taken off the security detail. He wanted to reassign Vappy back to the security detail for the mayor.
Yes, and Ferguson did in fact do that on his last day as police chief. It was his decision unilaterally to place Vappy back on the mayor's protection detail, and it was one that was later contested by Vappy's immediate supervisor, who wasn't aware that that shift was being made. Another curious detail that emerged is the fact that Vappy, during his reassignment prior to that, was placed at the Orleans Parish Communications District, which is 911 calls, basically, and it's a separate agency, and there's not really a precedent for NOPD officers being reassigned there, and it's still not clear exactly what he was doing there or why he was there.
So 3 days of this, and there was no decision by the judge. Now, all of this is about how it impacts the federal consent decree, which the city has requested to come from under. So basically, the judge hasn't rendered a decision yet. But what would it be about when she does make a decision? What is the outcome of all of this?
So she is deciding whether or not their investigation violated the terms of the consent decree. So basically, that's what she's deciding. And if they did violate the consent decree, it's pretty unlikely that she'll grant them the motion to exit, which the city filed in June. And she hasn't made a ruling in that either. So she has a lot to be thinking about, and it's not clear what's going to happen at this point.
After 3 long days, it was a pretty intense, days of hearing over there in federal court. All right, Missy, thanks a lot. All right, Jeff, over to you. Here we go, another season.
Yes.
What's your viewpoint of it?
Well, look, it's September, so it's a season of hope, right? It's the time of year when everybody's undefeated, and there's a lot of confidence right now, I have to say, out on Airline Drive with the Saints, talking to players and coaches. Even more so than normal. I mean, everyone's optimistic at this time of year, but I think in private conversations, hearing a lot more confidence. I think all rooted in the fact that they have Derek Carr at quarterback. The new quarterback has kind of lifted all the boats out in that facility right now. I think everyone knows this is a quarterback-driven league. The rules are basically gauged around the quarterback, the passing attack, and the Saints have really had somewhat subpar play at that position since Drew Brees retired. Derek Carr comes in, unceremonious exit in Las Vegas with the Raiders. But I think sometimes in life you can get a second chance. A fresh start will help, and he seems to be invigorated. I think he believes that this organization is much more functional than the one he left with the Raiders, and maybe it's a good fit for both sides. And certainly the Saints players and coaches believe he's the missing piece and maybe getting them back to the playoffs.
So, I mean, you can personally interact with all these guys. What is your feeling about how the team feels about Derek Carr? Do they look upon him as a leader?
Yes.
Do you get that feeling too, that he is
very
that
much.
leader?
He understands what it means to play quarterback, to be a franchise player, what being the face of the franchise is all about. It's beyond just throwing touchdown passes in games. He's engaged in the community. He wants to be involved in a lot of things off the field. I think he totally gets that, and that's exactly kind of what they needed, I think, at that position. That's what Drew Brees was so good at. He almost did it naturally, right? He was a natural leader. Derek Carr has that. What I'm curious to see is just how good he's going to be on the field, because he looks terrific right now in practice, in these joint practices out in Los Angeles. He looked terrific. Players all raving about him. I think his ability to pick up this offense very quickly has given them confidence. But I will say this, I mean, Andy Dalton did not play terribly last year. And there's a lot of people around the league that are questioning how much of an upgrade he's going to be. And so that's where I'm really interested to see is outside the building here, outside of the 504 area code, there's a lot of skepticism and questions about this Saints team. Inside the building, they think they're sitting on something special. So somebody's going to be right, somebody's going to be wrong.
What did you think about the changes in the kicking team last week?
That was surprising, I have to say. It was outside, I think, of the MO normally of Dennis Allen, who's known as a conservative coach. He's a defensive coordinator by nature, you know, that was his calling. And I think a lot of people thought he would take the safe route and go with the incumbents who have more experience. Instead, he did the exact opposite. Went to two unproven commodities. A 30-year-old former scaffolder is now the punter from Australia, Lou Hedley. He's a tremendous story. He's maybe the most interesting man in football right now. He was a construction worker for a long time and worked his way through the college system here in America and covered in tattoos. I mean, you're not going to have trouble picking him out of a lineup on the football field. But very interesting guy. And then Blake Grupe, who looks like somebody's child. He's so young looking on the field. He's the new kicker. And now they're going to be thrown to the wolves on Sunday. If it comes down to a game-winning kick and Blake Grupe has to kick it, it's going to be fascinating theater because, he's under the bright lights now. He's from a small town in Missouri. I think his high school had 200 students. So, it's bright lights now.
And so also the backup quarterback, am I right here, is now suspended for the first game? Was it the quarterback?
Well, he was a reserve quarterback, a rookie quarterback, Jake Haener, but he was not going to be the backup.
Okay.
Jameis Winston, the former starter, is the backup. And they still have Taysom Hill. So really, that's obviously disappointing for the rookie. He's going to lose 6 game checks, about $250,000 in the end, which is a lot of money when you're a rookie. It's a lot of money for anybody. But he was never going to really factor into this season on the playing field. He was a developmental prospect down the road. A good young quarterback, but certainly disappointing for him to get off to this kind of start.
And Derek Carr, just physically, is he kind of a tough guy? He doesn't look that big.
Well, we're going to find out. I mean, this is a very difficult opponent. Their opening opponent, the Tennessee Titans, known around the league as one of the more physical teams. And I think the message we're hearing all week is whoever wins the line of scrimmage. That's kind of football jargon, football cliche, but I do think it applies in this game. But more than anything else, I think the Saints need to get back to getting that Superdome environment. I mean, they really have lost that. They've only won 6 of their last 16 games at home, which is kind of crazy when you think about what that home field advantage can be like. The teams haven't been as good, but also that environment because of the COVID year, because of the construction going on. There's been a lot of reasons. They need to get that place back, and I think the excitement around Derek Carr and this team will amplify things on Sunday.
Okay, so away we go this weekend. All right. Thanks a lot,
we'll see.
Jeff. Yeah, we'll see. All right, another contestee, governor's race, debate.
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion that the media stop calling these things debates, okay, which we did also, but what happened in 1960 when Kennedy and Nixon met, that was the first time you had a televised, organized confrontation between candidates, and everybody called it a debate. And that probably was because it was two people. But ever since then, it started this whole era of, well, let's do this in our election too, and let's have these things. But when you have 5 or 7 people all together and you got an hour to do it, and you got all these rules, everybody's got to have a chance to make a statement, it really doesn't become a debate. It is useful, though. I mean, it's a forum. I think a lot of people could see who the candidates were and what they looked like and how they sounded. I don't know if it changes anybody's mind, And the axiom about these things has always been, you don't win them, you lose them. And the idea is, what they remember is when there are blunders, when somebody makes a blunder. There wasn't a major blunder last night. A few years ago, there was a gubernatorial debate, and one of the front runners was giving an answer, and then he just froze. He lost his frame of thought, and that was the big news next week. But if you can avoid that, then at least you go out unscathed. It was kind of an introduction to it. I guess the big story was Jeff Landry. Right. His refusal to be in this debate. The reason was because of the Urban League thing. The Urban League is, an activist organization. They're liberal. Their policy is different from ours, and so he backed out. But I think the Urban League did him a big favor because I don't think he wanted to be at this debate, we'll call it anyway, because he didn't need it. He had everything to lose by being on it. He's the front runner in the in a big way, and so he was really better off not being in it. Well,
maybe he didn't need it, but the voters kind of need it to see them all out there.
Well, there's going to be more of these coming. Okay, I think this is the only one he sidestepped, and he's also sidestepped a lot of forums that weren't televised during that because they get to be a lot. But if you're the front runner, you're the one that everybody's going to attack, and so why set you up? And also, if you're the front runner, you're probably more of the draw. And why do you want to draw more attention? So.
Yeah, I heard one analyst basically say that with this debate this past week, that the candidates who were there lost the opportunity to take on Jeff Landry while he wasn't there. We really didn't hear that much about him in that debate.
Yeah, and there wasn't a lot of division among the candidates. One was on abortion. There was the issue. There were some people that called for having a statewide referendum. And all of the candidates opposed that except for one, that was Sean Wilson. And so there wasn't much blood spilled last night, but people at least got to meet people.
But there will be more of these next week. There's really not that much time ahead of us. So, all right, E, thanks a lot. All right, Jeff, let's go back on over to you, and let's talk Tulane LSU football now.
Yeah, look, Tulane tomorrow or Saturday plays maybe the biggest game on their campus in decades against Ole Miss. Both teams are ranked. That hasn't happened in a number of years for Tulane. So there's a lot of enthusiasm about this game. Tickets, it's been sold out for weeks. I think tickets right now in the secondary market are $150. That's unheard of for a Tulane home game. So it should be fun. It's going to be very hot. It's going to be 2:30 kickoff. Not looking forward to that.
Because that's an open-air stadium, Muleman Stadium,
well,
right?
yes, but they have artificial turf. It'll be hot, trust me. But it should be a fun game to watch. And I think another stepping stone for the program. I think they'll compete well. Whether they win or not, we'll find out. But I think they proved last year they're a legitimate top 25 level program. I think Willie Fritz has done an incredible job of rebuilding that program, bringing some stability there. And he's attracted a lot of really top coaches, 2 coaches from the Saints that when I've covered the Saints are on his staff. So it should be a great entertaining game. I think their quarterback, Michael Pratt, is a legitimate, I think, top quarterback in the country, and he gives them a shot tomorrow.
Okay, then there's LSU.
Well, they got off to kind of a tough start, I would say. That game kind of snowballed on them in the fourth quarter. I thought Florida State would win the game, and they did. I didn't think they'd win it as handily, so I think people are disappointed, especially after how LSU finished last season on such a high note and doing, beating Alabama. I think in some regard it raised the expectations on Brian Kelly, and I noticed in his press briefings him trying to tamper down expectations on this season, because I think he knows they're like a year away from being back to the national title kind of challengers. They're still going to be very good. People should not give up on them. Don't give up on the quarterback, Jaden Daniels. They've got a very good team. People should have learned from last season when they dropped the opener to the very same team, Florida State, and rallied and had a tremendous season. I think they can do the same thing this year. They've got a lot of talent down there, but that was a very difficult opening game against a very good opponent.
Okay, well, just the beginning of it all. All righty, Jeff, thanks a lot. Ramon, over to you, and sort of sticking with the sports theme here. You now are the author of a book about a champion boxer from our area. Tell us about him.
Yeah, Tony Canzoneri fought right after the Great Depression. 5-time lineal champion of the world across 3 weight classes, featherweight, lightweight, and junior welterweight. And so very, very, I think that as far as I think it's a clear answer as far as boxers from New Orleans who the best of all time was or the most successful was, and that's him. That's not to say he didn't lose because he lost a lot, but that happens when you fight the absolute best that are, at the time. And he. So
the title of the book. Tell us the title of the book.
The book is Family Gangsters and Champions: Boxer Tony Canzoneri's Life and World, and really. It's really a life story about boxing. It's not a boxing book, and it's really just an interesting life. Obviously, very Italian-American, driven to provide for his family. Very colorful cast of characters around him, including, if you watch Boardwalk Empire, The Untouchables, and are kind of into that kind of gangster lore from back then.
So it's all
You'll recognize.
You know, obviously, it's in that era of the 1930s or so, but in the from the New Orleans metro area, Kenner area. He's from Kenner at that.
No, yeah, well, they were from off Carrollton, right? And then they were in Mid City for a little bit. He learned to fight in a neighborhood in a house in Bayou St. John.
I heard you say Kenner.
And then he lived in New York City, which is where he's going to encounter probably some of the more recognizable
New Orleans
gangster names.
Had a big boxing scene, didn't it? Weren't there several gyms around town? And
yeah, I mean, he came up in when they had the neighborhood boxing gyms. Came up in one by St. John called the Gayoso. A guy who ended up working for what is now the Sewerage and Water Board is the one who taught him the craft, and they had a very, very spectacular falling out that the book goes into. That was one of my more favorite parts of the book to write. So
he had several championships. I mean, now there's not a lot of different championships he won, but there was a lot of them at the time.
Every single one of them were undisputed championships that he won, right? This isn't like 5 titles. Look, and no disrespect to some of the other ones. I think that in the later times you find, you've had some, 1-time, 2-time like undisputed champions and some titleists who are disputed champions. But he won 5. He was the best in the world for a moment there.
Sounds like it's really going to be a fun read. You're a great writer. Always fun to read anything that you write. Where can we find the book?
The easiest place to get it would probably be Amazon.com, and they have it on Barnes & Noble. There's also some local bookstores carrying it. I saw apparently some bookstores in Italy picked it up, apparently.
Wonderful.
So if you're out
one
there,
more
check
time
it out.
the title, real quick.
Family Gangsters and Champions, boxer Tony Canzoneri's Life and World.
All right, by Ramon Antonio Vargas.
Yes.
All right, guys, other stories. E, over to you.
Well, there's a perception in the state, which is probably correct, that there's an insurance crisis. And on the debate last night, all of the candidates were asked if there should be some sort of a special hearing. All of them agree that there should be, but one said it should be a summit, not a hearing, or a special session to deal with it. And the Tim Temple, the insurance commissioner-elect, has already said that when he gets in office, he's going to ask for a special session probably in January.
All right.
So that's going to be a big issue early in the year next year.
It is a big issue, indeed. Okay, Missy, over to you.
So I'm super happy to say that New Orleans, as of right now, has gone about a week without a murder or a non-fatal shooting. So I'm just doing a piece about that. The last time we saw that happen was about 2 years ago during Hurricane Ida, when, of course, everybody was gone or hunkered down. So no shooting then. Okay,
Missy, thank you. Ramon.
I know there's lots of football on tap this weekend, but if you are a sports fan, make time for Coco Gauff in the U.S. Open Finals. If she can win that, she will etch herself, I think, as one of the best athletes. She is obviously from St. John the Baptist Parish. So
all right,
very good.
For her. All right, Jeff.
Yeah, look, the Saints and Titans making a very notable gesture on Sunday at the game. They're going to recognize Tim Shaw as a former linebacker for the Titans, and of course, New Orleans' own Steve Gleason, both former players living with ALS, trying to raise awareness for that disease. It's gonna be, if you're at the game, check it out. Steve will be on the field with his family.
All right. Thanks a lot. Thank you guys for being here, and thank you all for joining us too. We'll see you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.
Informed Sources is made possible in part by Susie and Pierre G. Villery.
With a continued passion for public television, we are proud to underwrite Informed Sources.
Please join us in supporting WYES Television.
This program is brought to you in part by the Eugenie and Joseph Jones Family Foundation, a local foundation proud to support education, the arts, and culture in the greater New Orleans area.